The United States Air Force Academy is an amazing place, steeped in long blue line history and brimming over with stories. I'm Steve Simon, class of 77, and I'm here to tell them. This is the Heritage Minute.
Welcome to a special presentation of the Heritage Minute podcast series with Steve Simon, United States Air Force Academy Association of Graduates writer and historian. And now, here is your host, Steve Simon.
Welcome to the Heritage Minute podcast. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel retired Steve Simon, class of 1977. My guest today is Colonel retired John Abbatiello, class of 87. Let's see, I believe we met when I worked in the cadet area on the Academy staff, and you were the Deputy Department Head of History. And as I recall, you were there about 8 years before retiring. So what was that like?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That was great. I actually served for 3 years as a captain in the mid-90s, and then I came back to be the deputy for 8 more years, and really was a great experience working with our cadets, preparing them for the profession of arms. I mean, that was the history department's motto, to teach history for the profession of arms.
Makes sense.
And worked with a great faculty, great boss, Mark Wells, and that brought me to where I am now, pretty much.
Okay. So you retired in, you said 2012?
In 2012.
So, okay, so
yeah, and I
a
went
decade
on,
ago. What's happened since then?
Yeah, it was a while ago, wasn't it? I went on to be a contractor down at Peterson for 4 years. And then in fall of 2016, the Center for Character and Leadership Development hired me to be their research director. Nice. And I've been doing that ever since for about a little over 7 years now. It's been great watching CCLD develop into what it is today, which is really the vision, I think, that some of the superintendents have had for a long time, is to have that synchronizing office at the academy to synchronize the development of leaders of character across all of our mission elements. Sure.
Certainly helped having Polaris Hall, where everyone could be jointly located too, rather than, I think before it was kind of scattered kind of all over the place.
I think you're right. Yeah, that opened in the spring of 2016, right before I got there. Yeah. And it's been a great facility for all of those kinds of things, bringing people together to talk about character and leadership development.
Yeah, it's nice having a core place to do that. So I understand you're editing and doing some writing on a book about leadership. Could you tell us a little bit about that project? Certainly.
I'm working with my colleague Mark Groth-Lucian from the Department of Military and Strategic Studies, over in the Dean of the Faculty. And the book is called From the Jaws of Defeat. And it's an edited book of about 15 chapters. And the whole idea behind the book is to talk about leaders that come into units that are failing and turning them around and making them successful.
Nice.
And we're covering from the American Revolution all the way to recent global war on terror operations.
Okay. Wow. Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
When's that supposed to be?
We're still working with the publisher to figure out deadlines and those kinds of things, and people are still writing their chapters. Mine is done.
And you're writing a chapter, yeah?
Yeah, I did one on Jimmy Doolittle.
All right.
Because
We've heard of him.
We've heard of him, yeah. I think Jimmy Doolittle is a great example of someone who comes into a unit that is not doing well at all, 8th Air Force in this case, and turning it around by some major decisions that he made when he first arrived, and making it successful.
Okay.
So my chapter covers that whole journey of not only his biography, but him arriving and the things that he did to make things better for 8th Air Force.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I think everybody knows all about the raid, but not necessarily a whole lot more about him. But of course, Doolittle, the namesake of our building, the AOG Foundation's headquarters. So I guess that demonstrates our esteem for him, that we do hold him in very high regard. And I know he's also famously the first exemplar when the Academy started that program with the class of 2000.
That's right.
So you were involved in the founding in the early days of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little bit later, but the history department took a very active role in that exemplar program. We wanted to make sure that we provided cadets with several different nominees that they could choose from that would exemplify the things that their class stood for. So we saw leaders throughout, ever since, right? The last 24, 25 years of cadet classes choosing their exemplar from a long list of heroes from our aviation history throughout this nation. Not only military, but also some civilians in there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's been a great program. It's something that could get the class together to look at their heritage, and it really promotes that whole idea of looking to someone who did great things and trying to emulate them.
Mm-hmm. Now, do they pick from a list, or do they have some say? Like, I'm thinking about Zemer, some maybe a couple of people that weren't that well known. Yeah, that once you learn about them, they're excellent exemplars, but you wonder how.
Yeah, I think it's a standard process of a call for nominations, and then the nominees get vetted. Yeah, and then the class votes on who they want for their exemplar. Okay. It's a pretty extensive process. Mm-hmm. They normally have a dinner to honor the exemplar. Right. Usually they bring in family members to talk about that exemplar if they can. And it's a great program. I really think so.
Yeah, it's super. Yeah, it is. I had the honor of attending a couple of those dinners with family members of the exemplars, and it's definitely a treat for everybody, I think. So.
Right.
So not everybody knows this, but in November 1959, General Doolittle gifted to the Academy 80 silver Doolittle Raider goblets, and they used those during their reunions. They used to be on display up in front of Arnold Hall, and then the Air Force Museum decided they wanted possession of them, so they're now in Ohio. But I understand you were there, or when you were here, you got to work with the.
Yeah, at some point, and I'm not exactly sure when it was, the history department became the action officers for sending cadets with the cups to every Doolittle reunion. And I actually had the privilege to go in 2007. It was in San Antonio that year. General Clark was the wing commander at Randolph at the time. And we, I think there were about a half a dozen Raiders that were able to attend that reunion. Okay. And they always bring out the cups and they drink a toast to the fallen.
To the ones that have fallen since the last reunion?
It's a very solemn event. Yeah. And it was great for our cadets at the time from the class of 2007 to be able to interact with those veterans of the Doolittle raid. Yeah. And get their insights about combat. And because these gentlemen went on to serve in other theaters after the raid. A lot of people don't know that. Right. They some were actually lost in combat in the European theater. Okay. Some were captured and served in Japanese prisoner of war camps throughout the war. Yeah. Doolittle always worried about those men. Some didn't survive, but some did. And but anyway, the cadets had a great experience throughout the years participating in that reunion. Up until I believe it was 2013 was the last one.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I know Colonel Cole was the last one to pass away. He was, I think it was Doolittle's co-pilot.
Right.
And he was associated with class of 63. There was some sort of, can't remember what it was, but I met him at a couple of their reunions. They would invite him back. And remember one in particular, it was he was 99, I think, and their event was down in the Arnold Hall ballroom, and he comes in and we said, "Would you like the elevator?" I said, No, stairs. And then he was like one of the last ones to leave. Elevator? No, stairs. So that was pretty neat. So I understand you also worked on a Doolittle-related project for cadets during COVID.
Yeah, we did.
What was that about?
In the summer of 2020, a lot of cadets were at home. And the commandant of cadets they were asking for assistance in developing programs for the cadets that they could go through while they were home, that they could participate in while they were at home. So the IFC actually approached us. The IFC was brand new at the time.
Okay. Institute of
I'm sorry. Yeah, I got to explain all those acronyms, don't we? Yeah. The Institute for Future Conflict, right. Under the Dean of the Faculty. They were new and they wanted to help contribute to developing cadets as leaders of character. And so one of the things that we worked together with them on was a set of recorded lessons that several of the CCLD scholars contributed to. For my project, Gary Packard, who was working for the IFC at the time, asked me to come up with a historical exemplar of someone who had the following characteristics. They were a leader of character, they were innovative, they were an academic scholar, and they were a senior leader in the Air Force. So I immediately thought of Jimmy Doolittle.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious.
Sure.
It's obvious, right?
Yeah,
He was the first Army officer to get a Ph.D. While on active duty back in the mid-20s when he was flying for the Air Service, or it might have been the Air Corps by that time. And he was actually the first ever in the United States, actually it might even be worldwide, to get a doctorate in aeronautics.
Wow.
Yeah, from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So anyway, I developed about a 3-hour set of lectures. I think it was in 4 parts that the cadets could watch, and there were always reflection questions at the end for them to think about. How was Doolittle a warrior? How was he innovative? How was he a leader of character? So we got them thinking about those things based on his example.
Okay.
And I think it was pretty successful based on the feedback we got from the cadets. They appeared to like it, and they also liked our other presentations that we put together on the history of the military profession and the future of the military profession.
Okay, yeah.
So our team did a lot of work on that, and it was a great experience. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, sounds like that may have been the rough draft of your chapter too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Certainly some cross flow there.
That's a good point. I mean. Since the history department always had that relationship with the reunion, a lot of us just knew naturally a lot about Doolittle because we always read up on him before we went to these reunions, and we would take turns going to the reunion. So the knowledge was pretty high already.
Yeah.
So then that work I did with the IFC that summer of 20 was pushing me towards this topic.
Sure.
And then for our Journal of Character and Leadership Development, I wrote a couple of articles about Doolittle. That talked about some of his moral courage and some other things which I thought were important to raise. So I wrote that, and then Mark Rodlucian and I came up with this idea about from the jaws of defeat.
Yeah, that's something.
Right, and he fit that model.
Yeah. Oh, clearly.
Yeah. We thought so.
So quite the Doolittle expert then. So here's a
not
story.
Quite, but I'm working on it. Yeah.
Getting there. Well, here's a story that you told me recently, which I really enjoyed. You said, of course, we all know about the Doolittle raid and maybe not a whole lot afterwards, but you told me that in the immediate aftermath of the raid, General Arnold was kind of shopping General Doolittle around for greater leadership positions, and General Eisenhower wasn't that impressed, perhaps. So it has a happy ending. So otherwise, I probably wouldn't bring this story up. But maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that story with us.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. After the raid, he worked his way back to the States from China, and he was promoted from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general. Skipped over 06,
Okay.
And he got the Medal of Honor in the president's office. Right.
Right.
And then Hap Arnold really wanted him to get an operational command of some kind. One of the problems, though, was that Doolittle was an active duty Air Service and Air Corps officer until 1930, and he mostly worked in the test and evaluation division of the Air Service, testing new airplanes, testing new cockpit instruments, those kinds of things. But in 1930, he decided to leave the service and go to the reserve because Shell Oil had offered him quite a higher salary to develop aircraft high-octane fuel.
Okay.
So he did that for Shell, but he stayed on as a reservist throughout those years before the war. But while all of his contemporaries were commanding squadrons, groups, and wings, and going to the professional schools, Air Command and Staff College, and those kinds of things, he didn't do any of that.
Okay. Yeah.
So when it came time to shop him around, Hap Arnold settled on trying to get General Eisenhower, who was planning Operation Torch, the North Africa landings, to maybe convince Eisenhower that, hey, Doolittle needs to be your air commander. And initially, Eisenhower didn't want him because Eisenhower, what I just said, he saw that Doolittle didn't have that requisite experience.
Not the experience, yeah.
But Hap Arnold said, we'll put a great staff behind him. They made Hoyt Vandenberg his chief of staff.
Right.
And Hoyt Vandenberg, as you know, went on to command 9th Air Force and eventually became the second chief of staff of the Air Force.
And have a dormitory named after him.
We have one of those. Yes, we do.
And a son become the commandant.
That's right.
When I was a cadet.
Yeah, later on. Exactly. So So reluctantly, Eisenhower accepted Doolittle as the air commander for Operation Torch. Doolittle did okay initially. Again, he had a great staff supporting him. Mm-hmm. Eisenhower didn't really like the fact that Doolittle flew around to all the various bases and actually flew on operational missions. He thought that he should be back at his headquarters answering taskers that came down, right?
Sure.
But Doolittle always led from the front. And eventually Eisenhower warmed up to him, though. There was quite a bit of reorganization going on in the Mediterranean after Operation Husky into Sicily and then invading Italy, mm-hmm. where the air organizations were reorged several times, actually. And Doolittle eventually became the commander of 15th Air Force, which was the strategic bombers in the Mediterranean, operating out of Italy. But then in September of 43, Eisenhower wrote Doolittle a letter saying, "Of all of my Army generals, you're the one who has improved the most.
Nice.
And you are a soldier in every sense of the word." So he really impressed Eisenhower. And Eisenhower went on to recommend Doolittle to take over 8th Air Force a few months later. Mm-hmm. So Doolittle in January of 44 goes up to England to take over 8th Air Force, all the strategic bombing operations against Germany and the other occupied countries mm-hmm. in Europe, and did very well there.
Outstanding. So it does have a happy ending.
It does, I think.
Our time is about up. Some final thoughts are next, but before we do that, we have something new for you listeners. The Heritage Minute series and Heritage Minute specials like this one are available in video and audio at our new Heritage Hub on the Association of Graduates website. Go to usafa.org, Heritage Hub, and watch or listen anytime or catch up on the Heritage Minutes you might have missed. Any other Doolittle tidbits you'd like to share with us?
Yes. Just briefly, my chapter talks about Doolittle's arrival at 8th Air Force in January of 44 and the things that he did to change the operations there to make mm-hmm. them more successful. And probably the most important thing he did was to convince, not to convince, but to allow the escorting fighters to break away from the written doctrine that they had. Mm-hmm. So the doctrine had been the fighters have to stay close to the bombers. At that time, they were just getting P-51s in theater that had the range to go to Berlin and back, but they were slowly growing. And Doolittle said, fighters, your job is not to defend the bombers. It's to kill Germans, kill the Nazis, and take out their Air Force.
And thereby defend the bombers.
Right. And be aggressive.
Yeah.
And by the way, later in that spring of 44, they allowed the fighters, once their shift, so to speak, of escorting the bombers was over, those fighters would dive down on the deck and attack anything in Germany that moved, basically, mm-hmm. especially airfields, bridges, any other facilities that they saw that were military in nature. The fighters had free rein to attack those on the way home. And eventually, after several months of that, the Luftwaffe slowly declined until it was less and less effective. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the war, those bombers could fly anywhere they want with impunity, with very little resistance from the Germans.
In large part due to General Doolittle's initiatives and his.
I think so. He was a fighter pilot, really. He tested so many different fighter aircraft. Right. He flew so many of them. He knew them, mm-hmm. and he knew what their capabilities were. And I think that helped him make this major change in doctrine, allowing the U.S. Army Air Forces to really win over the skies of Germany.
Nice. Well, thanks, John. Appreciate you coming in and appreciate you sharing all these stories. So we've been talking with John Abbatiello, and we're looking forward to the book. So
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I will certainly let you all know when it's out.
Please do.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
I'm Steve Simon. Thanks for listening. Find more episodes at usafa.org/heritagehub.